Okay, we have a jam-packed program today, so I'm going to jump straight in. Thank you all so much for coming to our webinar today, Funding Trees and Biodiversity. I'm Tani Burgess, the Carbon Farming Outreach Program Coordinator. This is our fifth webinar on the benefits of understanding the carbon on your farm and working together with AgVic, the 10 catchment management authorities, and Landcare Victoria. The Carbon Farming Outreach Program is running events all across the state to assist Victorian farmers and land carers to understand their emissions and the benefits of carbon farming. I want to start today by respectfully acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which the work of Landcare Victoria occurs. We're inspired by the legacy of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as this land's first custodians and land carers. Today, I'm coming to you from Naarm on Wurundjeri country and pay my respects to elders past and future and present, sorry. As a few housekeeping points, you can ask your questions at any time through the Q&A function. I'd really recommend you get in early, as I know that we usually get a lot of questions and we don't always have time to answer them all. My colleague Anna is also here to help you answer questions, as well as comment or upvote on others' questions. So if you see a question you'd really like the answer to, don't be afraid to click through. I want to start by introducing our first presenter. Graeme is a science communicator and extension leader in Victoria's agricultural sector. He leads a small team who deliver climate change services, supporting farmers and advisors in making sense of emerging issues associated with climate change and how to adapt our local farm systems. Graeme, thank you so much for joining us today. I'll pass over to you.
Thanks, Tani, and welcome, folks. Thanks for joining us. And wow, what a great panel we've got tonight. So I'm joining from Wadawurrung country in Geelong and pay my respects to elders past, present and future as well. So let's get underway. It's quite a bit to talk about, but I like this picture. This is a photo, an aerial photo from a farmer I was working with in Victoria 21 years ago, 2004. And you can see that they were planting their trees to spell out CO2 sink. And they did that so that anyone flying in the jets above their farm could look down and see the word CO2 sink. So next time, if you happen to be in a plane somewhere in Victoria, look down and see if you can find the farm. Good on him for doing it. It's an important reminder that actually landowners, land carriers and farmers are the only people that actually can take carbon out of the atmosphere. So well done, and we'll talk a bit more about that too. But there's lots of other benefits that trees bring apart from just removing carbon. Looking at the why, which is all around, greenhouse gases. We know greenhouse gases that were proven to trap heat back in the 1850s, so 170 years ago. And so the simple atmospheric science is just saying the more emissions we put up there, the more heat that's trapped, the hotter our future could be. So really, there's quite a challenge now. There's a couple of decades ahead of us to work out which future we're picking, the ones with the high emissions, high temperature futures, which has lots of issues and problems for us, or will we keep it to something hopefully we can manage? I might point out too that when you hear a lot of people talk about whether the world warms up by 2 degrees or 4 degrees by 2100, that when they're talking about global average temperatures of 2 degrees, on land, that's actually 3 degrees. So it's 1 degree warmer than the global average. So given that, we all live on land and we farm on land, we've got a lot of skin in this game. So there's a lot at stake to be looking at how we reduce emissions longer term. So I guess I know you might have heard there's a lot of international sort of meetings and things going on, but you can see here really the how we're tracking. There's been a lot of great progress made, but also with all of the different policies that are being acted at an international, at a national level and states, but also at corporates and businesses, there's been some great progress made, and certainly that gives us great hope, but also there's still a lot of work to do. And what's interesting is that last year was the greatest increase in parts per million of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that we've ever recorded. So I guess there's a lot of work underway to try and see if we can turn that around and reduce it from here on. So lots of progress being made. And I guess the next question is, well, how are we going locally? Are we doing our bit in Victoria? So Some good news. This is the latest greenhouse gas report that's now available in Victoria. And since 2005, Victoria's reduced emissions by 31%. So well done, folks. Well done, Victorians. A lot of heavy lifting being done by the energy sector, but everyone's playing a role. And the important sort of part of this is that we've been reducing our emissions, but doing that while the economy and our population grows. So this is not about sort of going backwards. It's all just about having a prosperous economy and doing things cleaner and better. That's what we're trying to do. So well done. We're certainly Victorians carrying our weight, but there's 8 billion people on the planet, and so we're needing everyone to do their bit. Just looking at the emission sort of profiles, you might hear about these different emissions gets divvied up in terms of different sectors. There's the agriculture sector. We sort of have about 18% of emissions for Victoria. But when you look at it overall in all of the other sectors, so energy, transport, fuel combustion, pretty well 90% of emissions are to do with fossil fuels and burning of fossil fuels. So that the big challenge is on about how do we transition and increasingly find cleaner ways to do that. Also, while agriculture might be 18% of Victoria's emissions, down the bottom there, land use change and forestry is actually a net sink. And annually, and the trees are absorbing about 18% of Victoria's emissions. So that's pretty extraordinary. Great effort. Well done to all of those out there. That's happening on our public forests as well as private land and plantations. So it's certainly playing its part. Okay, now just looking at pathways for the next sort of to 2035. This is just a bit of a figurative picture of the challenge for each of those sectors, and a lot of work being underway about how and where do we clean up and reduce emissions. So probably over time, as other sectors clean up their bit, what will be interesting, agriculture, which is only today 18% of emissions, will likely to be a bigger proportion of emissions by 2035. So while all sectors are having a go, it's just important we're doing our bit too. Now, agriculture doesn't need to get to net zero, but we do have to just show and prove how we're reducing our emissions along the journey. And there's been some great stuff that's been happening along the way. I'll just point to some good news, I guess, that just looking at Victorian emissions since 2005, I was just looking at the value of Victorian agriculture and our exports. In 2005, it was 6.8 billion, and in 2023, it was just under 20 billion. And in that same time, Victoria's agriculture sector has reduced emissions by 15%. So that's a pat on the back. Well done. Basically, the growers have been growing what the world wants, hopefully getting paid handsomely for it and doing it more efficiently, and finding ways of doing it with less emissions. So we've achieved that without any really, we haven't really been giving emissions a red hot crack. So with more innovations in technology for us to adopt in the next sort of 20 years, hopefully we can continue that and even add to it. So still about growing and exporting more, but helping meet that demand of low emissions food and fibre, which is what the world's looking for. And just on that, I guess probably a bit of a summary. This is the Australian Agriculture Sustainability Framework, and it's pulled together by the National Farmers Federation, but a lot of our farmer organisations, major industry partners, and agriculture and food and fibre companies are all involved. And that's been a big change from perhaps 10, 15 years ago. A lot of the sort of focus on emissions was the realm of governments. But really, what's changed in a significant way, more recently, has just been through supply chains, through corporations, through retailers. There's just a strong push to say, well, we all want to be part of just making sure whatever products we're purchasing, there's lower emissions associated with them. So plenty more on board. That's really important. and it's beyond the realm of individual governments now. This is happening whether we like it or not. And given we grow food and export it, others are asking us for this. Probably just share too that we recently ran the Agriculture Victoria on-farm emissions action planning pilot, and there was really thank the 230 odd farmers that were involved in that. It was a quick scan of the farm's emissions, seeing emissions from methane, nitrous oxide, and energy use, but also showing how farmers can reduce net emissions by the trees and land care plantings they've got, and also by improving soil health. So that was pretty good, and there was a lot of good work and action plans that folks have come up with there about what they can do to keep improving their emissions performance in the decade ahead. So that was really good. There's also some good case studies on our website. If I just went past that a bit quick, but on our website, there's some farmers who were very appreciative, have shared their story of why and what they're doing, and basically finding ways to do things more efficiently and just get on with the business of growing food and fibre. So good on them. Just sort of mapping out the longer term aims. Largely, this is sort of one way of looking at it. A lot of times in agriculture, we're trying to improve our emissions intensity, which is just basically reducing the emissions per kilogram of product that we grow on farm. And most of our industries, because we're using better genetics, better systems, we're actually doing that anyway. And that sort of leads us towards really improving our emissions intensity over time. That's under our control. Looking at how we reduce our absolute emissions and looking at any opportunities for insects and planting trees, which farmers were able to do. And then, of course, a really important one is looking after our existing stocks of carbon that's in our soils and trees, because it can be lost. And so protecting that is really important, as well as adding to it. It's interesting from a biodiversity perspective, when we talk about biodiversity, that's often the place to start, protecting the existing sort of remnant habitat we've got, and then adding to it, creating more corridors and things like that. So it does fit in pretty nicely. Just sort of this next one's looking at what happens when we plant trees over time. And I keep hitting the button twice. Sorry about that, folks. But on the left, you'll see that, as trees grow and you plant them over time, they get bigger and they accumulate more wood and they accumulate more carbon. They're awesome. And the biodiversity gains get better too. But when you look at it for carbon offsetting and carbon credits and things like that, on the right-hand side shows the annual carbon that's sequestered per year. So a lot of the heavy lifting is done in the first sort of decade of our tree planting. And so one of the things is, well, yeah, that's true, but the trees are still really valuable to have there. They're performing lots of great things for biodiversity and predatory insects and things like that. And so there's a bit of a hope that perhaps farmers get recognised for this, not just for the carbon that's being absorbed, but also for the biodiversity that is being added on farm. So we'll just talk a little bit about some of that and what's coming, and I guess that's a topic for tonight too. I'm just giving a bit of I give the look-see tool for those farmers that are out there and interested in just a quick estimate of what sort of carbon might be some average carbon sequestration rates for their farm. This is a tool by the CSIRO, and jump on that look-see. You can sort of zoom in and find your farm and block out an area, and it'll give you a bit of an estimate of how much carbon you might be sequestering in your area. So this next slide's just showing that, yes, there are some markets. You might have heard of carbon credits, and there's the Australian Carbon Credit Unit Scheme, or ACCUs, you might have heard about. It's all managed by the Australian Clean Energy Regulator. And really, to tap into that, you've got to have a registered carbon project with the regulator. And they have a system of approved methods or methodologies that have to work with. Often they have rules like no additionality, which means that, if you're going to plant the trees anyway, then it doesn't meet their requirements. So it's got to be specifically for the project. There's a lot of different methods that are available at the minute. There's things around reducing emissions from effluent systems. There's tree planting, there's plantations, there's blue carbon, there's soil carbon. Hopefully one day soon there'll be some feed additives and other things. But basically those methods provide the sort of rules for how someone can package up a carbon project. Now, you need good advice of this. It's not for the faint-hearted. There's a lot of paperwork. So often make sure you get good advice on setting it up. And farmers can do this themselves, or they can set up and register a project with a third party. But just remember, if you're using third parties, they'll obviously need to take a bit of they've got to cover their costs as well. So, but also I just want to make the point that most farmers are very happy growing trees for all the other benefits. So you don't need to be sort of registering an official project. You can just get on and grow the trees and be happy with what they're doing. So that's perfectly fine. But increasingly, and as carbon prices might rise over time, this could be an option for some people. Now, what's sort of new on the block is there's also, overseen by the Clean Energy Regulator, there's a market emerging called the nature repair market. And it's sort of a bit similar to the carbon credits in that it all happens with a fair bit of paperwork, but basically via registered projects and using approved methods, and stay tuned as this develops. Now, there is one method that's approved for this at the minute, which involves, replanting native forest and woodland ecosystems method. And farmers can choose, again, to set up and register a project or work with a third party to do it for them, which is a lot easier. Now, I guess the hope is longer term that, maybe farmers can be rewarded by these sort of things and that actually, you can stack a carbon project and a biodiversity project in the one planting sort of project. So that would be pretty nice to see that as it develops. But I've been around and working in land care and agriculture for a long time, so I think got to be a bit patient, but there is some good signs, and hopefully this will progress soon. I think there was some breaking news today about environmental legislation and things that might come up there in Canberra. So it's obviously a pretty hot topic. I guess 99% of farmers and land carers I've worked with over the years have been really successful at planting trees on their farms, and they're doing it to get more immediate benefits from shelter, shade, timber, bird life and beneficial insects, and just improve the look of the farm, cleaner watering dams, even biosecurity barriers against neighbours and roadsides, improving land value, stuff like that. But the overwhelming one is that it just brings people joy watching those trees grow. It's pretty fantastic to watch. So the key message is really make sure you design your tree projects for what benefits you're seeking before chasing any specific crediting schemes. They sort of see them as the cream on top. It's probably a good way to think about it. Just looking at the different ways of trying to support trees on farms. There is some grants around at the minute, and the Victorian Trees on Farms program is offering support for Victorian farmers. It's basically the government, Victorian government's keen to help support farmers get more trees on farms. So there's a program there at the minute that's providing for trees or farm forestry on farms. So just Google the Victorian Trees on Farms program and you can find out a bit more about what's required there. Also, the Victorian government was supporting the Bushbank program, which we'll hear more about from Krista, being managed by Cassinia, which is pretty much the carbon element of it, but looking at the habitat restoration and biodiversity side of it. So they're both really good programs. And don't forget, we're very lucky across all of our parts of the state. There's fantastic land care coordinators and gurus. They're really the glue to help connect farmers to whatever support's available, whether it's just advice you're after or whether it's various grant or support programs. Just get involved with land care, Tani. It's the way to go, and they'll point you in the right direction. So that's pretty well all I've got, Tani. So hopefully I've kept within a lot of time because I'm really keen to hear what the rest of the panel have got to say. Thanks.
Absolutely, Graeme. Thank you so much. I think you've actually come in early, which is great because we're going to have lots of times for questions. Um, and yeah, there was so much incredible information in that presentation. I didn't realize that, trees offset 18% of our state emissions. That's a massive chunk.
Yeah, it is. It's very significant. Yeah, that's right. And I know like it will play a key role, but we also know one thing about the trees and our forests is that the more the climate change, the more it actually does put at risk some of that carbon sequestration. And the same for soil carbon. We know that the highest amounts of soil carbon are in our coolest, highest rainfall environments. And so, you know, uh, the actual amount that our land can sequester in terms of carbon in trees and soils also depends a bit on making sure we reduce how much we let the world warm up. So yeah, so it's interesting that tie in. But anyway, there's plenty more room, and I know as most farmers drive around the countryside, there's always plenty more spots on farms where we can sneak in some more trees for a bit of good shade and shelter.
Absolutely, and not to just shamelessly spruik Glencoe Victoria's webinar series, but I know you did go into some planting tips with some of the Otways Agroforestry Network in our webinar Talking Trees earlier in the year. And Cassie Schaaf has also discussed the impacts of climate change on soils. So if you want to learn anything else about those topics, those recordings are available on our website. Now, to pass over to someone that knows a whole lot about getting trees in the ground, I would love to move to Krista. Krista has a long career in environmental management in Victoria, ranging from planting thousands of native plants on farms with young people to developing statewide policy. She's worked for community-based organisations as well as local and state government, and her favourite thing to do is to see projects come to fruition that make a difference to landscape, people, and the creatures that live in them. This has been made more real than ever in her current role as Bushbank Project Manager with Cassinia Environmental. And in her spare time, Krista volunteers with Landcare and explores wild places with her families in all sorts of adventurous ways. Thank you so much, Krista. Let me just make sure you have the ability to control your slides. Has that worked?
Yep, I think so.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thanks very
much. Over to you.
Thanks, Tani, and hello to everybody. Yeah, thanks for inviting me to come and speak, and a great presentation there, Graeme. A good kind of background to what I can talk about with what Bushbank's doing and the offer that we have. I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm here on Taungurung country, and also not far from Dja Dja Wurrung country in central Victoria, and just acknowledge the traditional custodians on the lands that we work right across Victoria and also into New South Wales and South Australia. So I work for an organizer or a company called Cassinia Environmental. Cassinia is a land management company that operates in the biodiversity offsets kind of business, but also in carbon offsets. And have been doing work like this since 2004. And you can see some pretty cool stats there on the page around what Cassinia has been able to, the impact Cassinia has had over the years. But my role with Cassinia is as the Bushbank Private Land Stream Project Manager. So about 2 or 3 years ago, Cassinia tendered with the state government to deliver Bushbank, or the Bushbank Private Land Stream, and was successful. And so Bushbank is the Victorian government's program to meet the targets set out in our biodiversity strategy, the state's biodiversity strategy, called Biodiversity 2037. And it has both a dual kind of objective, one to do carbon capture and the stuff that Graeme's been talking about, but also a big focus on biodiversity protection. And there's 3 streams. There's a First People stream and a public land stream. And the part that I'm involved in is the private land stream. So we've got a bit over 30 million over the next 15 years or so. And our big target is to revegetate and restore 20,000 hectares of land within Victoria. And all of that is protected with the Trust for Nature Conservation Covenant. So the projects that we're funding and supporting are forever projects, they're Habitat Forever, and we lean into the carbon market and the nature repair market and other co-funders to help support that. So it's a pretty interesting program. It's incredibly unique, it's incredibly diverse, and I'll give you a little taste of how it operates. So just waiting for the slide to change. Maybe I'll try the keyboard. Okay. So the big question is, how are you going to reach a 20,000 hectare target? It's massive. And there's two models that we're kind of using. One is we are working with private landowners and are inviting landowners to express interest and take part. And that's what I'm going to focus on tonight. But it's also important to know that we do have another model, which is around land purchase, where we're essentially buying properties that we think are suitable for bushbank, that play a really important role in the landscape in terms of doing a great restoration effort, and also that are viable, like the land's not too expensive. Also that it's not really important agricultural land. We're not there to plant trees on really important ag land that has a much better value growing food and fibre for Victoria. But also, so we're looking at more marginal country. And we buy that land, we do the restoration efforts. It's co-funded, typically with carbon. So we have a third party that invests in the carbon that's grown on that property. And yeah, we do the works. We'll put the Trust for Nature covenant on it, and then we'll on-sell it. Now, either City Environmental purchase the property, or we have a bushbank revolving fund that sits with Trust for Nature. So that's a big part of what we're doing. But the other big part of what we're doing is working with landowners to do the same kind of projects on their properties. And that's what I'm going to really talk about now. So, I think I just, sorry, every time I go to click, it's not moving the page.
No worries, I've just sent that request through to you again,
Thank
Krista.
you. Okay, so this is probably a pretty important bit of information, is like when am I eligible for a bushbank project? So as long as you own the land, then you're eligible. But we are looking for sites that are a minimum of 20 hectares. I know that's a big area, but we're doing big scale re-veg through bushbank. And the good thing is that there's the Trees on Farms program through DECA for smaller sites if you want to access funding. So yeah, so we're looking for big sites, and that's because we're putting a conservation covenant on the property, and that's a big expense. And also when we're leaning into carbon and other co-funding markets, they're looking for larger sites, and that's when they get a bit more viable. We're mostly looking at the restoration of woody vegetation, but we also include areas of degraded or intact remnant in our project design as well. We won't put a bushbank project on areas where you've got other obligations to restore the land. It might be through a biodiversity offset, or it's part of, I don't know, your planning or whatever. So it has to have no other obligations, and obviously got to be okay with the conservation covenant. So when we're selecting sites, we assess them based on this map here, which is showing. This is the DECA Bushbank Target Landscape Map. This is important because area sites that come into us that are that score highly, like in the darker green, score a bit higher in our rating, but they also attract a slightly higher bushbank amount, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. But that's important to know, and you can find this map if you're interested in what how your property scores on the DECA Nature Kit website. But we're also looking at the project size, benefits to threatened species, if there's First Peoples involved or community groups like Landcare involved, the landscape context, if it's along a waterway, if it buffers public conservation reserves. All those things help us assess a site and whether we think it'll be a great project for bushbank. And then the kind of work we're looking at doing is, your 101 straightforward re-veg, that's the main thing we're looking for, or otherwise supplementary planting in areas where there's degradation. It needs some understory species. But we also include areas of assisted regeneration, which might include weed control or pest animal control, or changing grazing regimes, and of course including areas of enhanced remnant, because really we all know it's really hard to grow a tree and create an ecosystem, and the most important thing we can do is protect the stuff that's already there. Every site we'll have, or especially for our revegetation and supplementary planting, we will work out the minimum standards for restoration, which are based on EVC. So we're looking at replanting with locally native species, and we're looking at achieving a certain number of stems per hectare and a certain species diversity that's based off that EVC benchmark. We don't always rely on the mapping from the state government because it's often wrong. We'll come out and do a site assessment and determine what most appropriate EVC is for that site. So the process goes, landowner goes, oh, it sounds really great. I've got a really cool 20 hectare or more, hopefully, site that I'd love to do some restoration works on, put in the world's easiest EOI grant application you'll ever do, which is on our website. And yeah, they'll come to our panel who reviews them. Every 4 months or so, we sit down and look at what's come in. And if you get selected, you've basically locked in your bush bank, secured your bush bank funding. And that's when we'll start come and do a site assessment and work with the landowner to develop a project summary. We'll look at the mapping, we'll determine the different zones, the species lists, the restoration standards. And we'll also talk about co-funding, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But if the landowner's happy with the project as presented, they'll sign a letter of intent, and then we'll develop a native veg restoration plan. And that really is like, you know, the guideposts of what we want to achieve on that site. So it outlines the restoration zones, the standards, the management actions, responsibilities. And all the different various agreement documents, like everything, there's always a lot of bureaucracy. We have a landowner agreement that needs to be signed. The sites will have to sign a trust for nature covenant. And if there is a carbon co-funder, more often than not, there'll be some sort of carbon rights agreement that needs to be signed as well. And that's for the carbon estimation, the carbon area of the project. So it takes a while. Like we're working with landowners for 6 months up to 12 months, even more, in developing a project. But I guess the magical thing about Bushbank compared to any other grant program I've worked on in the past is we've got time. We've got time to plan projects, and we're looking now at sites that we're thinking about planting in 2027 at this point. So we're able to develop a really good project, and everyone's really comfortable with what's on the table before anything gets signed. The funding's an important thing to think about with Bushbank. So the offer from the state government, and I'm very honest with this, often is not huge. It is a part payment, an incentive payment. It can range from anything from about $500 a hectare to nearly $1,500 a hectare, depending on that shading of green you were on that map I showed earlier, and that's the landscape value. So you've secured your Bushbank funding. Anyone who's done a bit of re-veg knows that $1,000 a hectare is about maybe a third, if best, of the cost of implementing a project. And so that's when we lean into co-funding, and this is very much dependent on the landowner and what they want to achieve. And we'll work with the landowner to coordinate that and work through the agreement documentation. And so this weird little table here tries to, as best I can, kind of indicate you the range of projects and the different co-funding options that we have. And not every site can attract co-funding. Everything is pretty unique. So we have quite a few landowners who just wanted the Bushbank money. They really wanted the covenant to protect their efforts. And so they're delivering their project themselves without any other co-funding and just the Bushbank money. And that's the simplest and easiest project we work with. And they're really great projects. We have other landowners who are doing something similar, but they're also maybe getting some funding from Landcare or from the CMA, we're working with organisations like the Natural Resources Conservation Trust and One Tree Planted. So they're still biodiversity projects. There's no carbon happening, but they're still stacking funding to make this project happen, I guess is the best way to explain it. And then we do have projects which are both biodiversity and carbon projects. Some landowners are looking to register their project as an ACCU project, which Graeme explained earlier, and we can co-fund those. So the Bushbank money will help you do the implementation on ground, you register the project, and in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, you're going to start bringing in an income from the carbon that the credits that you're selling on the market. And, yeah, I'm nearly done. So there are lots of really good options there, and definitely, yeah, a great financial option if you can afford to do the work up front. Another option is we have co-funders like Land Life Company and Greenfleet who would like to achieve projects on ground straight up. They'll pay for the work on the ground typically, but in return they take the carbon rights. So, and the bushbank money becomes a stewardship payment to you. So really interesting funding models, and we work with each landowner, depending on what's available. So I'm just hoping to click on. So we've got a few examples, and hopefully Tani can send this around the presentation to everyone tomorrow. But I'll flick through them very quickly. There's a project in Newham, co-funded by Greenfleet. The bushbank money becomes a stewardship payment to that landowner. Another project up in the north near the Murray, it's a very well-known olive oil company. They've registered this project as ACCUs. They'll apply for them as the trees grow. The bushbank money is helping them make that happen on ground. This is lovely karst up in northeast Victoria in Mansfield. Project he's wanted to do anyway. He really wanted the covenant, protected it. Bushbank money funding's making it happen for him. And just to give you a sense of scale, this is a massive site up in the northwest Victoria, in Mirani, one of our projects. It's 1,540 hectares. That's the scale that we're working at with the purchase land. And just to show where we're at, we're getting really close. We've reached 60% of our target. There's sites all over Victoria. Most of them are private land sites. The big hectares are in the purchase sites. And yeah, basically the funding's there until we meet the target. So I reckon 3 more years, and then yeah, we'll have some other options. If you want to get in really quick, we're going to have a round shutting at the end of this month. Otherwise, we'll look at projects again probably around the end of February next year. And that's me.
Thank you, Krista. That's so wonderful. It's so great to see the scale that you're able to do re-veg on. Just for those that want to try, and I'm going to quote directly from Krista here, the easiest expression of interest in the world. You have till November 30th if you're interested in finding out a little bit more or applying for the Bushbank program. I just wanted to ask one very quick question. What does a Trust for Nature covenant mean on a property?
Oh yeah, good question. Thank you. So that is it's protection that goes on title. So it is registered on your title, a conservation covenant, so that when you sell the land or you hand it on to your family or whatever, you know that piece of that revegetation, that part of your property is protected in perpetuity. And so there is limitations on what you can do because it is habitat. And so you can still go on the property, you can still visit it, you can camp there, you can enjoy it, you can even collect, get some domestic firewood for your own self, you can crash graze it. But everything you're doing is about enhancing the conservation values on that part of on your property. And the great thing about having a Trust for Nature covenant and being involved with Trust for Nature is that you're part of their stewardship community. So forever, that landowner will always have someone coming to visit every 4 or 5 years and chat to you about how that site's going and talk about what else needs to be done to make it even better for conservation. So it's a really good part of the program.
Yeah, it sounds absolutely wonderful. And it's such a wonderful way of making sure that nature's going to be there for future generations as well.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. Again, if you have any extra questions for Krista, please pop them in the chat and we'll do our best to get to them at the end of the webinar. Now, moving on to Laura Grubb. Laura has a deep passion for showcasing the sustainability of beef production. Originally hailing from Western Australia, which we won't hold against her, Laura has been fortunate to have worked with Producer across all states in Australia as well as internationally. Through a variety of roles over the past 10 years, Laura has been able to foster her passion for helping producers to translate customer trends into on-farm practices that support healthy businesses. Last year, Laura joined Greenham, a family-owned and operated beef processing business with plants in Victoria and Tasmania. Laura, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Wow, those first presentations have blown me away. It's made me feel a little intimidated that I'm only coming along talking about a very small sector of the industry. But I hope that someone might be able to get some value out of this. So, just quickly, as I start, my screen will cross over in a moment. So Greenham is a beef processing business. We have two sites in Victoria and one in Tasmania. We are focused on natural beef production, so particularly focused on that grass-fed system. And that has grown over time. We started with the Never Ever program, which people are probably familiar with, and now we're stepping into that next stage. So we've got lots of customers internationally and domestically that are looking at sustainability and trying to understand what that means for them when purchasing a beef product. So a couple of years ago, we set out to work out what a sustainability standard could look like for the beef industry. So we sat down with our customers and we sat down with producers and tried to understand what a sustainability standard needed to bring to the table for those stakeholders to get value. So for customers, they're wanting claims which are defendable, something that they can stamp their name across and hand over to their consumers and feel comfortable that what they're selling them is true and accurate and representative of what's happening on farm, that there's investor confidence and data in behind that to really make sure that's bolstered. And for producers, we're all looking for something that's practical, that's actually going to replicate what it is that we're doing on farm is going to deliver those productivity benefits as well as the environmental benefits, because as we know, it's really important that we have both of those. And like every producer in the room, the more programs we're involved in, the more paperwork that's involved. And so the number one question we always get is, how much time is this going to take me? And we're very conscious of trying to minimize that and work out where we can work with other process programs or work with land care programs, et cetera, to be able to capitalize on the work that's already been done. So we've done this work and we've now come together with the Green and Beef Sustainability Standard. So this is an optional standard that not all our producers are involved in, but anyone has the ability to if they would like. And it's a tack on to our Never Ever program. So it's taking those fundamentals of really solid animal stewardship and layering over a sustainability component in over the top. So we've used different industry frameworks and mechanisms that are available, such as the Australian Beef Sustainability Framework, to add that kind of structure in the program. So that way it looks and feels something similar to what we're seeing throughout industry. So it was initially came up with a challenge from our CEO, Peter Greenham, and we went to both customers and producers and had a crack at what this would look like. Our group of producers actually came forward and they put together the first issuance of that standard. So they actually sat in a room and hashed out what could this look like? What are some of the things we would like to demonstrate as an Australian beef industry? And we then took that to customers and it was a bit of a back and forth and trial period. We did some on-farm trials and we have what we have today in the sustainability standard. And that is continuously evolving as we speak and as we learn. So in this program, it gives producers the chance to jump in at 3 levels. So level 1, our tier 1, is really our starting point. Lets people dip their toe in the water and have a crack and see what this is all about and just understand if it's worth anything to their business. Then we have tier 2, that's where our premiums start kicking in, where we're able to sell this product as a certified regenerative product. That's the market that we're looking at. And that involves a bit of measurement and planning and trying to bring those sustainability principles into the day-to-day activities of the farm. Then we have tier 3. We have some fantastic producers, and I do see some familiar names on the participant list today that are going above and beyond, and this is something they're deeply passionate about or working to incorporate in the day-to-day of their farm and their future planning. So they might be involved in programs such as Krista's, and we're wanting to reward that. So we're wanting to recognize those going above and beyond. This is obviously a new area for the industry and not something that is, we could base a whole supply chain on at this point, but it's being able to provide a direction to producers where we think these sort of areas are going to go to. So that's our program where it sits today. We cover off 4 different themes in our program, and I will not have time to go through them all today, but we start off with our animal welfare area. This is something that is, something that we're living and breathing every day. Is generally not a big stretch for people to be able to look at these items required under animal welfare, but we're looking at things that are, pushing that next envelope, like using pain relief for all adverse procedures. We have in the bottom left there economic resilience. We actually put this in not necessarily because it was a request from customers, but more because we wanted to be able to step forward and demonstrate to customers how important it is that we don't forget that businesses still need to be profitable and will never be sustainable unless we're still making a profit and we're still putting money back into that business. So this provides us with the ability to make sure that we are managing our businesses and helping producers provide some of that structure because everyone's at different stages along that journey, but also then provides us with some generic data that we can talk to our customers and understand and have really meaningful conversations about why some needs may or may not be practical. Environmental stewardship is our largest pillar, as you can expect, and we're really looking at principles that are regenerative in nature. So we're looking at making sure we're managing our ground cover and our grazing management in hand with that. Our big focus on soil health, as we all know on this call, is really important in everything that we do. Looking at healthy waterways, we have a lot of producers that are involved in cattle out of creeks programs through Landcare in Tassie, for example. And we're trying to bring in those principles and incorporate that into our overall farm planning. We're looking at climate resilience. Biodiversity is a massive area where I think most conversations I have with our producers on farm is, oh, I don't do too much about biodiversity. When you get into it, everyone is doing something. They're planting a shelter belt. They know that there's a couple of endangered critters out in the back 2 paddocks, and so they actually excluded areas or learned a bit more about their habitat and make sure that we're protecting it. And that's something that we probably don't account enough or give ourselves credit enough for the work that we're doing in this space. So being able to put some structure around how we think about it means that we can have those forward-leaning conversations with different stakeholders and be able to sell that story towards them. And of course, we have a little bit of an area there on carbon management, which I'll cover off in a little bit more detail in a moment. And lastly, an area that none of us like talking about because it is really uncomfortable, people and community. So agriculture, as we know, is a really unsafe industry. We work with dangerous situations day in, day out. We work in family dynamics with different contractors, and it's quite a difficult work site as such to work within. And so something that we wanted to help our producers protect themselves with is just making sure all of our producers in this program are meeting those state government requirements around workplace health and safety, because that's something that we often don't remember to make time to talk about. So there are components in there, and it's often a difficult one for us to talk through, but there's lots of support resources out from the different state government support networks to be able to implement those. So that's the overarching capture. As you can see, we've tried to keep it really holistic and not just focus on a couple of key environmental components, but really step back and take in the whole farm business. What does that look like, and what would sustainability look like for that business going forward? So that just enables us to change that kind of conversation we have with those customers and make sure it is actually truly sustainable. So on this next slide, this is just one tiny area, which is carbon, but I thought was probably timely to talk about in this presentation. So you'll see here how we divide up our program, so tier 1, 2, and 3 there. So in tier 1 for carbon, we're really just about growing awareness of what is carbon. So in the industry, we hear a lot, but we don't necessarily know all the nitty-gritty. There is so much jargon in the carbon space, and it can be so confusing. So step 1 is let's jump in and just clear up any unknowns. There's lots of gaps in our knowledge. I have lots of gaps in my knowledge that I'm always looking to fill. So step 1 is just going through some training, just so that way, everyone in the business is comfortable with what carbon could look like in the business. In tier two, we start measuring. Sorry, I'm not crying. I just have terrible hay fever today. So apologies as I keep wiping away tears off my face. These gums outside are beautiful, but gosh, they're causing me havoc today. So in tier two, we start looking at doing carbon calculators because if you can't measure it, then you have no idea where we go from there. And that's one of the difficult bits, and probably one of those really cautious tales that people have heard all sorts of horror stories around doing carbon calculators, but I can promise it's not as scary as it looks. And often it's easier to dive in and have a crack and then go back and refine that data once you understand, what it is that we're looking for. So there's lots of free tools available. We do know that there's different stakeholders like banks providing some of the more fandangled calculators out there for free for their clients. So we'll help our producers through there. And then what's most important is then we try and apply that to the business. So we're putting in place a carbon action plan and understanding what does that look like? What are some of those key things I could do in my business? It might be something that you're already wanting to do in the next 6 months, or it could be some bigger dreams that you might have over the next 10 years. And that's totally fine. All we're wanting to see here is that we are starting to think about these concepts in the day to day. In tier three, so that's our real stretch tier. So just a reminder, this is not a must. This is a let's look at the direction the industry is going. In this area here, we have some producers that are already carbon neutral, or that's a journey they're really dedicated as a business to chase. Or other people are looking something, as I think Graeme said earlier, about something that's a bit more tangible in terms of control, is their emissions intensity. So that's something that we're looking at in this tier. And at the moment, we're using the national benchmark. So they've just been updated. So I think it's sitting at 12.7 kilos of CO2 e per kilo of live weight, but I'll have to check that one. But that's where we're looking at the moment, is trying to work out where you are in comparison to other producers around the nation. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised you won't be too far off the mark. And we have a lot of producers sitting well and truly below that. And so it's just something, until you actually go through the exercise of calculating, you might not know where you sit. So that's just an example of how the program is broken down. We're trying to make this as digestible as possible. We can start with those tier one items and then slowly over 12, 24 months, whatever you're comfortable with, move through those tiers as you need. So at tier two, those principles in there have been certified by third parties to meet regenerative principles, which enables our customers to sell that as a regen product and be able to get a premium, and hence we can pass that one on. So just quickly, if this is something you are looking at, the things that you're already doing, we're finding most producers are strategic grazing management. I think we're all getting really good at that, and we're just refining those techniques more now. Climate preparedness. I mean, we're all sitting there looking at what the long-term forecasts are and trying to make those early decisions in the business. And unfortunately, that's going to continue to be the case. Soil testing, that's a pretty day-to-day thing that we are building in, is thinking about our soils and planning out our soil testing for the year. Performance monitoring and feedback. We're running such sophisticated businesses these days that everyone is looking at that data, and it's becoming more important in our decision making. Weed management, and of course managing our ground cover and measuring that in an objective way. Obviously, some of the new and challenging things that we are seeing across the industry is carbon accounting and action plans. This is something that is still new. Everyone's hearing about it, but actually taking those first steps can be a bit of a barrier. Soil biology testing is probably a newer area that we're seeing for producers, and we can provide some support on that, on how to go about soil biology testing. And those mechanisms there are becoming more sophisticated and more cost effective. And then we have a lot of our people and safety areas that are a little bit of a tricky one for some of our producers, is doing stuff like injection checklists, making sure that we've got a methodical way of identifying hazards and doing those risk assessments and thinking through how we mitigate some of those risks. And in general, we never have enough time in our days to put records and plans together on paper. So that's always a tricky one. And so we do provide lots of templates, and we're happy to work with any other templates that your service providers or community groups might have in place. So that is a quick run through the program. It really is there to try and package together a way of understanding those credentials that we're doing on farm and put that in a digestible manner to talk to customers, because they're the ones that have to sell this product. And I can tell you, most of them have never stepped foot on farm. So we need to, put a really uniform package around what it is that we're doing, put some measures in place and build their confidence that what we're doing today and what we're going to continue doing into the future is really sustainable, and they should absolutely buy Australian beef. So that's all from me, Tani.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was really, really informative. I love, bringing together all those elements of environment and community to make sure that we're not just sustainable in terms of our carbon emissions, but in terms of whole of farm enterprises. I just wanted to ask, you talked about farmers giving themselves credit for what they're already doing. Do you have any advice for people that might want to start thinking about sustainability? Any kind of first steps you advise people to take?
Honestly, one of the best things is join one of your local community groups, whether it be a land care, and not to, keep plugging land care, but that's definitely, great like-minded peers, and they've been through this and they've got trials and tribulations they can share. It could be a on-farm benchmarking group in your area. I know there's lots of those around, but reach out to your peers, because you'll probably find that other people have gone through this thinking process and can help with that. We often discount or don't understand the value of some of those little day-to-day tasks that we do. And so if someone's already been through some of these frameworking processes, it actually helps us reframe how we think about our business and how we can sell it forward. But your processor, and we're not the only ones with programs like this, lots of processors do reach out to them, because they're incentivized to help you, right? They've got customers looking for this product, so they're here to help you. So do reach out to whoever your processor is, or your supply chain that you're working with, and do have a chat, because they could have a lot of support mechanisms to help you.
And I guess the other side of that is the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? So
Yes,
if you are
absolutely.
highlighting all the amazing things that you're doing, you may be first in line when those incentives come in.
Absolutely. There's so much demand for sustainable products in the market. So definitely sing out if you think you have a story to tell, because I'm sure there'll be someone definitely willing to capitalize on that with you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Laura. Now, someone that I know has a story to tell is Rick. Rick Oldham founded Farmers for Farmers with a vision of empowering farmers to create thriving communities by building climate resilience, profitable enterprises, and make sure that those farmers are appropriately recognized and rewarded for their efforts to regenerate landscapes functioning at scale. As a professional civic engineer and a 30-year Angus beef breeder at Archie's Creek, Rick brings proven leadership from his 47-year career at a national and international as a national and international construction executive, a four-time chair of Bass Coast Landcare Network, founding member and three-time president of Bass Valley Landcare Group, and current Landcare Victoria treasurer. He champions regenerative agriculture that delivers improved productivity, reduces emission, and enhances landscape function for generations to come. Rick, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah, pleasure, Tony. You've usually up all my 12 minutes with all that. But anyway, look, for those that are on the webinar, welcome. And what a wonderful set of speakers we've had here. As I sit here, as a farmer, I'm hearing this wonderful, clear messaging and information and support for those that are on the path in terms of meeting the challenges of a changing climate, and I'd actually say by this the opportunities too, right? So, look, it's a privilege to be part of this this panel. I'm as the introduction said, I'm a farmer from the Bass Valley, so that's in Bunurong country, and I'm tonight talking to you from the Gadigal country in New South Wales. So a bit of a journey, but look, I've got a small to modest size property at Archie's Creek, beef breeding herd of 90 cows, and on 200 acres. And I've been on a journey, I think, planting trees for 25 years, planted over 50,000. And I can tell you, it's good for business. My shift for, my focus really has shifted from perhaps a minimalist position, plant just what you need to stop the, what was that term you used, Laura? Cattle out of creeks and, and those sort of rough areas where you didn't want cattle to go, to really taking a much broader view. And my view of around trees on farm and the value of that has matured incredibly since, over the years. So I'll just take you a bit on that journey, and we'll go from there. Thanks, Tani. Good. So a lot of my why is embodied in that photograph, really. The setting up of the farm, for the generations to come, for meeting that, and it's really quite a good feeling when you go from that tube stock that's going to get planted by your granddaughter to that plantation that you see in the slide there, and for me that's a lot of the why, but that why I think is many facets, right? And I think it's important as you go into the investment to plant trees, and it's not cheap, right? It's not cheap to plant trees. Some plantations are obviously cheaper than others, etc. But it's really important that you do explore that why, and often you'll find that the why, and I might be saying a lot of obvious things to people, but at times the why is many faceted, and I've certainly experienced that in my 25 years. I'm on a journey, not because there's a magic number of 20% of my place. I never thought, when someone said that to me years ago, I never thought I'd get anywhere near 20% of the farm under trees. But I'll probably get close to that at the end of this, another 18 months. But it's not a magical number that I've been aiming for. It's been a journey from, as I said before, a minimalist position. I took over the farm it was my parents' farm in 96. It was a dairy farm. So my dad had 19 paddocks, 100 cow day paddocks, central laneway, cows up and down the laneway every 4 times a day. It wasn't a tree on the farm. Right, was not like many dairy farms. There's not a tree on the farm, because every blade of grass counts. To taking that sort of first step to re-veg those really steep bits and the gullies, and you didn't want cattle to get in there because if they hurt themselves, you'd big issue to get them out, and on the creek sides and riparian areas, etc. To a place now where I've introduced significant agroforestry into the re-veg plan and agroforestry, and also taken the significant benefits of that as I've done the carbon equation, I guess, on the farm. So it's been a journey. It's a wonderful thing to drive, and amongst the amenity, the well-being that offers. I know that's maybe a soft why, but it's certainly very, very real. Farmers spend a lot of hours on their own, on their property. And I really liked your piece, Laura, where you talk about, as part of the sustainability framework, around the safety and well-being of people as a really significant thing. And in fact, I planted an area on the farm for that very issue. It was a steep gully, there was a bit of erosion starting, but I fenced it off and planted it out, which was that photograph I showed earlier, because of safety. That was a very, very steep piece, a piece where you'd roll an ag bike pretty easily, roll an RTV, roll a tractor, whatever. So you just don't go down that anymore because it's fenced off and treed. So over the time, the value that trees have brought to the enterprise over time has significantly increased for me, to a point where it's a significant aspect in terms of the many facets. One of them being the carbon sequestration is significant in my overall approach. Now, I was lucky to be awarded as one of the pilot farms in the VicAg greenhouse gas emissions action pilot. And so thank you, if you want to change that slide there. What's happened over the time is that you can see an aerial photograph of there, and I know these slides might be hard to see in this format, but I guess they're going to be available. But it's really, I call it farming for climate now, right? My focus here is farming for climate, because, you know, for me now, it's about the profitability, it's about the productivity, and farming for climate, as I see it with the planting of trees, is a significant element towards improved productivity and profitability. So that slide there show how the various reasons for the plantings that I've done on the farm, and how that's moving to that small insert you see there on the bottom corner there, which is probably my final piece of the plan. That I had the old farm plans of 40 years ago with the aerial photograph and the clear plastic, and it's amazing how true those things have emerged. But thinking's changed a bit in terms of what types of trees, you know, making sure that the right tree in the right place. You know, I've had a lot of mistakes too, where, you know, you haven't seen things turn out the way you wanted them to be. Thanks again, Tony, for that slide change, please. So, you know, what's your why? Get that sort of sorted. I think it's a good one of the techniques is to, when you ask yourself the why, ask it 5 times. So every time you come to an answer, ask it again. And it's a technique used in many different ways. But you will find that, you know, for me now, the plantings have gone from a shift from environmental conservation outcomes, you know, which have their merit, absolute merit, and I totally support it. But from that erosion protection, riparian, you know, livestock exclusion, to shelter belts, to biodiversity corridors, to, you know, to trees that provide a necessary for I think the increasing heat stress days, and I think you mentioned that, Graeme. You know, the increasing heat stress days that I've observed we're having down in the Basque Coast, etc. For those, so I've designed some plantations that actually deal with that item as part of farming for climate. And I think just as I said before, the you know, the feeling, the livability, the amenity that these trees have on my place, as apart from the asset value and everything else, is something of, you know, one part of my why. Thanks, Tony. I think there's a decision hierarchy too in terms of the design of where trees are. And I think I didn't have, well, I had the luxury of designing where I wanted to put trees on the farm, because there wasn't a tree on the farm. But in terms of some of the physical infrastructure on the farm, when I took it over, if it was a blank canvas, the design would have been different. I've got the major laneway thoroughfare dairy configuration, you know, because the cows up and down from the dairy every day. Wouldn't be the same if I'd taken the design philosophy around water first planning. And then from that, it's, you know, it was PA Yeomans back in the 50s around this whole looking at your farm, where you plant your trees, where you plant your, you know, the windbreaks and all of those farm tracks and everything else around how water basically traverses on your farm, how it's retained, etc., etc. So I think the design considerations are a really important point around putting the trees, because there is a significant cost element associated with the trees, and they're going to generate a significant value for you. So I'm making that point around the, to review and amend your plan, but have one that is, you've spent some time and has answered your why. Thanks, Tony. That's just an example of how I've gone through my farm now. I've converted 19 paddocks from a dairy farm, and dairy farmers know what rotational grazing is about. They understand that and what we've looked at now in terms of beef farming is this is a quite intense grazing. I've converted 19 paddocks now. This was part of my project with Vic Ag. I've created 90 grazing cells. So that's through the use of the re-veg and the significant money that you need to put into the fencing of the trees. That's the biggest cost. So what I've done is looked at how that expense around the trees and having to do that's a necessity for their protection and their growth and everything else, how that then can be integrated into your grazing management system. And so what I've been able to do now is create these 90 grazing cells. So if you think about that, and some of those grazing cells don't get used in certain conditions. They might become too wet or whatever. So it's combining both the permanent fencing and the electric fencing to get me my 90 grazing cells. But I've done this, and what the tree plantations have done is changed and created a much more efficient and productive grazing management system. So that's where I go to the very heart of designing, where you're going to put your trees. There's just some costings, they'll be different for everybody. It depends on the complexities, the number of changes in direction and access and topography and a whole bunch of things. But I'm just making the point here that there's significant money invested in fencing for trees, and you have to understand that, you have to be prepared for that and consider that in terms of your trees. Now, thank you, Tony. So one of the things that I've done now, and it's the brainchild of a gentleman, Clinton Tepper, and that is to create these multi-story plantations. Now, these multi-stories, in my case, I've planted the biolinks down the edges of the multi-story plantation, and also hardwood timbers in the high value hardwood timbers in wide spacing rows in the center of that. So what happens is that the cattle, after those trees get to a sort of a level of withstand the young cattle grazing, amongst the trees, it creates a wonderful environment for, to manage these heat stress days. So you've got crops that can be grown between the trees because of the spacings are typically 12 meters, and you put your watering spots in there. So, and the other thing that I've got in this particular example on the farm is that I've got prevailing hot north winds that those hot winds get filtered by the trees. They go over the water in the dam, and I've got this sort of lounging area there where the cattle can get the benefit of those, like a Coolgardie effect through there. So smart design. I go back to this sort of design considerations for your particular circumstance. So obviously the trees will provide a great greenhouse gas emissions offsets, carbon sequestration. Potentially, it won't be up to me, but if somebody did want to create the saw log revenue out of it all and what have you. So there'll be thinnings, there'll be all those types of things, and agroforestry has got a level of costing associated with it that's it is fairly it can be quite expensive. You can move on from that, Tony. That's just a bit of a example of what goes into that. Other costings there for how I approach the costings of this. I guess I just saw, and I had the ability, to fund it. But it takes a lot of management. It takes a lot of management of an agroforestry plantation in terms of the weed control or the preparation. That's one of the keys that I probably didn't do a good enough job on, was the preparation. And then of course you've got the weed load, and you've got the grass load, and you've got all of the management of the timber as it matures, in terms of the pruning and the thinning and what have you, forming and all the rest. So there's some costings that I use, and everyone's labour rate's going to be different. How they charge? Do they charge their own labour out? What they charge for their tractor? Whatever. So you've got to make some decisions, but go through an exercise of looking at what the costs are. Next, thanks, Tony. So that's a couple of examples. You can just see the multi-story plantations just starting to come out of the ground, and they're only sort of like, less 12 months old now. But they're strategically placed, part of an overall plan, and I'm happy with the way that's going. So this was a combined, the biolinks in with the agroforestry. Thanks, Tony. I'm conscious of time. Agroforestry, I think, is a lot of work going in now with the former guys, Vic Forest guys that are in with Deakin now, and Vic Ag, and there's a lot of good resource, and I've got a look good expertise, and really good practical people that are there to help you in terms of and good grants around too, that Graeme's mentioned, and others around the investment in agroforestry, in trees on farm. And I think for me now, I'm at about 5% of my agroforestry on the farm. I'm moving it to 8 to 10, only because that's part of my plan. Nothing magical about that. And I think one of the things that is important to do is to lodge this planning development notice with your local authorities, so that if you ever wanted to make sure that that's not going to be necessarily you can't do anything with that timber in the future. So you've got to do that. And the plantations that I've designed is a multi-use. So here's my emissions. You saw that template, that infographic that Graeme put up earlier. This is my example of it. I'm about 290 net tons of CO2 equivalent. Laura mentioned around that emissions intensity, which is the sort of unit of measure, I guess. It's your emissions divided by your kilograms of product. In the case of beef, it's live weight. And what I think you said average was about 12.7. Well, I'm a little bit under that with sequestration in there. So going through this process is a very, very valuable process to understand what your emissions are. And yes, I did struggle with the calculators, and I'm a civil engineer. Maybe that was the problem, but they were quite complicated. But I think there's you can work yourself through it. There's the Melbourne University one. There's many different ones that are there. So it's important to get your understanding of what these emissions are, and then look at what your sequestrations. I've got an offset of trees about 13% on my emissions, for example. Well, that's going to go up more with the more plantings. And what from this I developed a emissions reduction action plan, and I just try to put it on a page. There's a lot of words. I've got about, I don't know, a really detailed report from, it was very well done. There's good templates around your action plan. I think Laura mentioned that. But I try to put this on a page, which looks at, I know I've got a strategic target. I know there's a lot of talk around net zero, but it's like safety, when people say, well, zero harm, right? If it's not zero, what's the number? What is it? So I think the emissions intensity metric is a really good one, because you can start to measure yourself against, like producers, and becomes a unit of measure and what have you. So my strategic objectives sit within the grazing management, trying to improve that grazing management. Soil carbon goes to the heart of increasing perennial pasture and plant available water and more tree revegetation and also tree agroforestry. So they're my key strategic objective areas. I've got focus areas and I've got short-term actions and then success measures. So it's a neat little way, if you get to look at this, copy it and use the format if you wanted to. But it's a clear little way to get it all on a page. Thank you. So for me, the journey continues. It's the saying, the best tree you planted was 20 years ago. Well, you get good and as you said, Graeme, that as the trees get older, the sequestration increases. But as you saw in that earlier picture, it takes the first step. You got taking the first step within a plan that you have for your property, I think is a really important thing. And the amenity is huge. The joy is huge. I think the co-benefits from carbon are real. You've got measurable improved productivity. I have up to 20%. I don't know what it would be beyond that, but I haven't seen anything but improved productivity. I probably didn't start that way in thinking, but I'm certainly there now. I think I'm nearly there. Probably
Yeah.
over 12.
Yeah, a little bit over, Rick, but honestly, with so much going on your property, it must be hard to keep it succinct. There's just so much to talk about, and it's so wonderful to learn from your experience. I'm actually gonna go straight to you for questions, if that's okay. I'll jump us straight into the Q&A. David's asking about your herd health and productivity from having shade and shelter. Have you had a measurable impact between now and when you've started?
Well, yes, I have. I've got less vet fees. I've got last year I had 100% cows in calf, 100% pregnant. The vet couldn't believe when he did the preg testing. I think they're sort of two sort of major areas, I think, for me. In terms of the herd health, I mean, the calving's good. I've got high calving success. And I think generally I haven't seen any decline in herd health. The growth rates of pasture, the pasture improvement, the improvements in soil organic carbon in the pastures. That's the journey, that's the mission that I'm on now. Because you saw that net that carbon equation, if you like. I didn't have anything for soil organic, didn't have any carbon sequestration in soil. So that's an area that it's probably more complex, harder to calculate perhaps, but that's an area that I'm going to do, which I'm going to see that's going to in turn improve productivity and translates to better pastures, better health in cattle.
Absolutely. And I imagine that feeds into a lot of what Laura was saying about a more sustainable farming system overall, because your cows are happier and healthier and cooler, and 100% of them are pregnant, which is amazing. I'm actually going to go to a question I can see Krista's already answered here from John, which is around smaller landowners and how they can participate in carbon and biodiversity markets. Krista, you've given a very good answer here in the chat. So I might just go to you and ask, are there viable products for landholders who are growing trees and not running stock, and those smaller properties that may want to explore carbon and biodiversity?
Yeah. Sorry, I jumped in and didn't realize it would then disappear off your list.
All good.
Yeah, but it really, I mean, it is so site dependent and what your vegetation type is and what the carbon potential is on your site. So I shared an example of a landowner we've worked with who's got a 37-hectare site, so around 100 acres. And he is doing an ACCU project. He registered it himself, did a lot of the planting himself. The Bushbank funding actually came later, and he used that to help, sort of fund the works. He had to change his planting design a little bit because he needed to make it more environmentally friendly and have more diversity in his planting, to get the bush bank funding. But he has convinced me that that was an economically feasible option for him, to register that ACCU project, and obviously then sell those credits down the track. And I guess he's angling for a high premium credit, by it being protected by a conservation covenant, by being really environmentally diverse. So he's quite happy for us to share his story because he's hoping to sell them as a premium down the track. But yeah, it really depends. Our co-funders we work with have different needs and requirements. So they either tell us what amount of tons of carbon they want if they'll co-fund a project. So Greening Australia, for example, will look at a project that's about 10,000 tons, and then work with a landowner to do a project there. Green Fleet, we know, will look at smaller sites, but they want forest EVC types because that's a high carbon value, basically. Land Life Company will only really look at sites that are about 100 hectares or more, maybe smaller if they've got a really high carbon value. So we're starting to get to know what different organisations are looking for. But if you want to register on the carbon and the ACCU market, there's no size limit. It's just probably where things become economically feasible, and there's organisations who can help with that.
Great. And I guess as we talk about economically feasible, that's all around offsetting carbon. So people buy the carbon you're sequestering by trees or soil and other registered means on farm. I guess the other option that a lot of farmers are exploring, and Rick spoke a little bit about this in terms of using his trees to be able to inset.
Insetting, yeah,
Yep.
definitely.
I guess, Laura, would you be able to talk a little bit more about insetting and why farmers might look at planting trees to offset future
Yeah,
emissions?
absolutely. We get asked this question all the time, because there are lots of opportunities in the carbon market for producers. Now, everyone's running their own business and they can do whatever they like with their carbon credits. And I encourage them to start making those changes now. Just do the baseline monitoring so you know where you started. That's really important. For the meat industry, it's something that is an open discussion and no one's solved the problem yet. But just be mindful if you're selling your carbon credits to someone else, they get to use them. You don't get to use them for your property. So just make sure you have a plan in place about what happens if perhaps your supply chain requires you to be carbon neutral. And that's where we're finding a lot of producers, once they've talked to the variety of markets they're working with, have decided to go for an insetting approach, because we do think that there's going to be large customers. So, for example, a Woolworths or a McDonald's or someone who are really large purchasers of beef that are going to look for insetting opportunities. And you'll see that if you're on, Beef Central or whatnot, you get the occasional article talking about where they're going to head in this direction. There's not huge amounts of movements yet, but there will be, I'm sure. And they're going to look at essentially buying those credits from within the supply chain. So they want to inset, so keep those within that supply chain so that beef comes with those credentials. So that's kind of it's a little bit more nuanced than that, but that's the overarching concept, is keeping those carbon credits within that supply chain so that whoever is purchasing that product can claim them. So there's lots of ways to cut this cake, and it does get a little bit complex. So I would just recommend that if you are you are obviously on this as a producer, but make sure you talk to your markets and just have that discussion first before getting too carried away with selling carbon credits. This is a really fast-moving space, but there's a lot of uncertainty. So just make sure there's not someone who is already one of your stakeholders that might be wanting to get those credits. And yeah, so it is very complicated. I'm sorry I don't have a cut and clean answer for that, but just as a wary, I guess, to producers, just to check with your supply chain first, because they might want to buy your credits from you in a future scenario.
Absolutely. Great advice there, Laura. Graeme, I'm going to super quickly handball one to you. We've just had one come through from Ellie. she's wondering if there's any productivity data on grazing shaded pasture under agroforestry. My cattle seem to avoid shaded areas, particularly in winter.
Yes, there is a fair bit, but every situation is a bit different. And often with regards to productivity benefits, we know that, just like ourselves, to be out on an exposed, windy paddock that's going to get the extremes of temperature and heat in the summer and cold in the winter, that, obviously it impacts productivity because those animals are eating just to try and stay warm or deal with being too hot in summer and things like that. So, but also it does depend a bit because, if we're talking about avoiding shade in winter, that's because they're probably trying to warm up. So they're trying to stay in a nice bit. So part of it, and a lot of what Rick's pointed out, is it's providing niches on the farm where the animals can find their comfort. And there's plenty of productivity data. I mean, one of the simple ones working with dairy farmers is when you get cold snaps and cold weather and wind exposure, they can measure it that night in what milk's being produced, because those animals are put so much more energy into just maintaining their body temperature rather than putting into production. So in ag science is rich with lots of data on that. It was really interesting. Rick talked about the 100% calving sort of rate. That was pretty amazing. And one thing is that increasing with heat waves, that does put a lot of pressure on pregnant animals, because it just, all bodies, once you get beyond some certain limits, you can get increased aborts out there in the paddock. So it's really important. And it's just that thing of creating a farm that's a good place for animals to live. It's a good spot for humans to live, and then a lot of beneficial insects and bird stuff are all happy there too. So there's a lot of upside. And I must say that a lot of the farms I've seen over like 3 decades now, and a bit like what Rick, it's a bit addictive. You can keep finding more areas to put in trees, but it's what they're doing on all of the land that's not going into trees and making it more profitable and good pastures that means the overall thing is more productive. It's sort of, it's really, once people get onto that, they realise this is a much better farm to be on. Thanks, Tony.
Absolutely, and there's a lot of upsides, and I'm sure we could go all night talking about all the benefits of trees on farm. I've just realized we've got a little bit over 7, so thank you all so much for sticking with us, and thank you all to our panelists. I've learnt so much tonight. I know finance can be a little bit dry, but thinking about sustainability on farms is so important, and it's so wonderful to learn from all of your different experiences. I guess to say, please save the date. We have another webinar coming up on the 11th of December, exploring the futures of sustainable farms and landscapes. That'll be going a little bit more into the biodiversity side of things and how we can actually start thinking about the future in our broader landscape planning too. So that'll be a really, really interesting one with Heytesbury District Landcare Network and Kiwawodonga Landcare Network sharing their experiences of the new futures planning process with us. Finally, please let us know your feedback. We really do use it to shape what these webinars cover and what's going to be talked about in the future and in our resourcing. So any information you can provide to us is really, really helpful. Thank you all for coming. Thank you so much for our panelists. Hopefully we'll see you next time, and hopefully you'll have a wonderful rest of your evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks all.